Beijing just sent Washington a message so calculated, so surgically timed, that 3 separate foreign policy analysts I spoke with in the last 2 hours described it using the same word: warning. Not a threat, not a bluff, a warning. And the man who delivered it once sat beside Deng Xiaoping and helped shape the most consequential geopolitical rise of the last century. If you've been watching mainstream coverage today and wondering why nobody seems alarmed, stay exactly where you are. Because what I'm about to walk you through changes the entire picture of what's happening between the United States, China, and Iran right now. At 9:47 this morning, Saturday, April 25th, 2026, Victor Gao, former senior translator to Deng Xiaoping, current vice president of one of China's most influential foreign policy research institutions, walked into a Beijing venue and delivered a statement so precise, so deliberately worded, that financial desks in Hong Kong and London began reacting before American political commentators had even read the transcript. I want you to think about that. Markets moved first. And markets don't react to noise, they react to signal. If you want to understand what that signal means for your cost of living, for American influence abroad, and for the next 6 months of global politics, hit the like button right now so this analysis reaches people who need to see it. And let's get into it. To understand why this morning matters so much, you have to go back exactly 60 days. February 28th, 2026. The Trump administration launched a military operation against Iran. The public rationale was nuclear threat prevention. But according to partial intelligence summaries that surfaced through reporting out of Berlin and Paris, the deeper strategic goal was something more specific: severing the multi-billion-dollar energy relationship between Tehran and Beijing before it became structurally impossible to undo. The plan, from what 3 independent Pentagon-adjacent accounts described to reporters in Washington and London, was never built for a long war. It was built for a fast win. Strike hard in the first 72 hours. Collapse the air defenses. Watch internal Iranian pressure do the rest. Then declare success before the news cycle moved on. Trump reportedly told associates, per accounts referenced by 2 major American outlets, that this would wrap in 2 to 3 weeks. He privately compared it to 1991. He expected the Iranian military to fold. He expected the Iranian public to turn. He expected China, busy with its own trade pressures and internal economic headwinds, to stay quiet and wait. He was wrong on every single count. And the way he was wrong is the part nobody is explaining clearly enough. Share this with one person who follows geopolitics, because what happened next on March 4th, 2026, is where this story breaks completely open. 4 days into the operation, at 6:22 in the morning local time above the Strait of Hormuz, something happened that stunned American naval commanders on the ground. Iranian missile positions that U.S. planners had assessed as neutralized, gone, taken out, eliminated, came back online simultaneously across 3 separate regions. Not 1, 3. And within hours, Iranian units using a combination of surface-to-surface missiles and drone formations with capabilities that caught U.S. naval leadership off guard had begun reasserting control over the single most important waterway on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's daily oil supply moves through that passage. Not 5%, not 10%, 20%. When that corridor tightens, the entire global economy feels it within days. At the pump, in freight costs, in food prices, in everything. And while American naval forces scrambled to respond, something equally significant was unfolding on the diplomatic side of the board that got almost no coverage in Western media. While the strait was closing and the USS Abraham Lincoln carrier group was repositioning under urgent orders, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was already on the phone. Not to Washington, not to Tehran, to Riyadh, to Ankara, to Islamabad, to Cairo. According to individuals with direct knowledge of that week's diplomatic exchanges, Wang Yi contacted the foreign ministers of more than 20 nations inside a single 72-hour window. The message, according to 2 diplomatic sources speaking anonymously, was consistent across every call. China opposes this conflict. China urges an immediate return to calm. China stands ready to help find a resolution. Read that carefully. That is not the language of a country watching from the sidelines. That is the language of a country positioning itself as the responsible adult in a room the United States just set on fire. Now fast forward to this morning. 60 days of fighting with no clean resolution. Oil sitting at levels that hit American drivers every single time they fill up. The Dow down 8.3% since February 28th. Consumer sentiment at its weakest reading since 2009. 3 Republican senators who have publicly distanced themselves from the speed and cost of this operation. And into that environment, Victor Gao walks in front of cameras and says exactly what Beijing has decided the world needs to hear right now. Let me give you his words accurately, because the precision of the language is the entire point. Gao stated that China fully supports Iran's right to defend itself. He described the closure of the Strait of Hormuz as a direct consequence of American actions, not Iranian ones. He confirmed that China has been actively engaged behind the scenes, making calls, applying influence, and leveraging 2 decades of relationship capital built through what he called steady and peaceful engagement. He noted that China's energy security is robust enough to absorb even the most severe disruption scenario. And then he said the sentence that stopped every analyst I consulted cold this morning. He said, "If the United States genuinely wants peace, it knows how to reach China, and China stands ready." I need you to understand what that phrase means inside the grammar of Chinese statecraft. Senior Chinese officials do not use the word ready casually. This is not diplomatic filler. In Beijing's communication architecture, readiness declared publicly by someone of Gao's standing means the position has been cleared at the highest levels. The timing has been assessed as correct, and the message is intended to land with full weight. 2 separate diplomatic contacts based in Asian offices in Beijing, speaking to journalists earlier this week, described the atmosphere inside Chinese foreign policy circles as, and I'm paraphrasing their characterization rather than quoting directly, marked by calm confidence. Not anxiety, not urgency, calm confidence. In strategic terms, that is the posture of a party that believes it holds advantages the other side hasn't fully registered yet. Now here is where the story gets even more significant. And this is the part that connects everything else. Multiple sourced reports from international outlets drawing on insiders in both the US and Chinese governments point to a summit between Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping being quietly coordinated for around May 12th, 13th, or 14th of 2026. American broadcast crews have reportedly been placed on standby. Chinese logistics teams have reportedly been coordinating with White House advance staff. If this meeting happens, it would be among the most consequential leader-level discussions since the Cold War. And critically, its core subject would not be trade. It would not be Taiwan. It would be Iran. What I see happening beneath the surface, based on everything I've reviewed in the past several hours, is this. China is not simply offering to host a Trump visit. It is offering something far more valuable to a president who, according to coverage across 3 separate Washington-based outlets, is increasingly isolated within his own circle on the Iran question. China is offering a structure, an off-ramp, a diplomatic architecture that allows the United States to exit a conflict that is no longer delivering its intended outcomes, without having to announce publicly that the original plan failed. Victor Gao's statement this morning is the visible signal that this architecture exists and that Beijing is holding it open. But here is the complication, and this is what markets understood before the political class did. Even if Trump wants to take that off-ramp, taking it is not simple. On one side of his inner circle sit the hardliners, advisors and allies who view any China-brokered resolution as an unacceptable concession that hands Beijing strategic leverage at precisely the moment American credibility in the Middle East is at its lowest point since the Iraq withdrawal. On the other side sit the pragmatists, senators, governors, and major Republican donors who are watching fuel prices, watching poll numbers, watching early midterm projections, and delivering a different message, sometimes quietly and sometimes not so quietly. This war is becoming a liability. An election is coming. A divided coalition cannot win, and a president caught between those 2 camps, unable to fully satisfy either side, increasingly reactive rather than directive, finds his capacity to control outcomes shrinking faster than his public statements suggest. Reporting from 3 sources connected to senior White House staff, referenced across multiple outlets in the past 2 weeks, describes the internal environment as, to fairly characterize the accounts, operating under pressure that exceeds normal policy disagreement. Decision timelines have compressed. Signals sent to allies and adversaries have at times contradicted each other. The kind of clear, forward-looking strategic planning that great powers require during genuine crises has become, by these accounts, harder to maintain consistently. Meanwhile, the broader world is not waiting for Washington to get its internal house in order. It is watching. And it is drawing conclusions. I reviewed 3 independent polling studies conducted by research institutions across Asia, Africa, and Latin America during March and April 2026. The results are striking. In a survey spanning 14 nations across Southeast Asia and the Middle East, 71% of respondents described China as a more stabilizing force in the current global moment than the United States. 71%. That is not statistical noise. That is a measurable, documented shift in how the world is calibrating its trust. And Victor Gao stood inside that shift this morning when he spoke. He was not just addressing American viewers. He was addressing every government in the world that is currently deciding where to align as the international order reorganizes faster than most analysts predicted. He said China advocates for calm. China builds solutions. China was in the room for the Iran-Saudi normalization agreement, one of the most unexpected diplomatic breakthroughs of the decade. And in the same breath, the implicit contrast was unmistakable. The current American administration launched the conflict that closed the world's most critical oil corridor. You cannot spin your way out of that contrast. You can shape narratives temporarily. You can manage headlines and redirect attention spans. But you cannot spin $97 oil when a working family feels it every week at the gas station. You cannot spin a Dow that has dropped 8.3% in 60 days. You cannot spin 3 members of the president's own party stepping away from his signature foreign policy action. Facts are indifferent to official messaging. Facts accumulate. And eventually, facts win. So what does the actual situation look like right now? As of this morning, the President of the United States finds himself in a position with few recent parallels. Formally, he commands the most powerful military on Earth from the most secure office in the world. Practically, his freedom of movement is more constrained than at almost any prior point in his term. The hardliners cannot deliver the decisive outcome they originally promised because the conflict did not follow the script. The pragmatists cannot deliver stability because accepting a Chinese-mediated resolution carries an ideological cost his base will not quietly absorb. The economic data is moving in one direction. The polling data is moving in one direction. The midterms are approaching. And this morning in Beijing, a man who once shaped the direction of the world's most populous nation appeared on camera to tell the world, and the White House specifically, that China is ready. There is an image that keeps returning to me as I watch American foreign policy this spring of 2026. It is the image of a ship's captain so committed to his chosen course that he stops reading the instruments. The compass says turn. The depth gauge says stop. The radio says danger ahead. But the captain holds course because changing direction feels like admitting error, and admitting error feels worse than whatever risk lies ahead. Every instrument is saying the same thing right now. Markets are saying it. Polls are saying it. 3 Republican senators are saying it. The governments of 71% of surveyed nations across Asia and the Middle East are saying it. And this morning, Victor Gao said it again, in the clearest, most deliberate language Beijing has used since this conflict began. The question is not whether the instruments are accurate. They are. The question is whether the captain is still reading them. Here is what to watch for daily. And I mean daily, because this situation is not pausing for anyone. Watch the Trump administration's public language on Iran in the coming days. Not the policy itself, the language. The specific framing will tell you whether Washington is genuinely moving toward a negotiated close or simply repackaging the current situation to buy time before the next decision point. Watch Beijing for any public signal on the May summit. A confirmed date means China has decided the off-ramp benefits them. A delay or cancellation means Beijing has recalculated and prefers to apply pressure through other means. Watch the Strait of Hormuz activity levels daily. Each additional week of even partial disruption adds approximately 0.44 percentage points to U.S. consumer inflation, according to projections from 2 independent economic research teams. And that math compounds. It does not pause. And voters in the Midwestern districts that decide midterm outcomes feel inflation in their bones, not in their headlines. Above all, keep watching Victor Gao, because what he did this morning was not impulsive. Individuals of his standing do not escalate in public without authorization from the levels above them. They move when the timing has been assessed as correct. They speak when the message needs to be heard with full force. Today was that moment. The message was delivered. The only remaining question is whether the people in Washington who need to hear it are actually listening, and whether they still have time to respond before the decisions make themselves. If you've stayed through this entire analysis, you already understand more about what's actually happening between Washington, Beijing, and Tehran than most people who will read a dozen headlines today. Drop a comment below. Do you think Trump takes the China off-ramp, or does he hold course? I read every single response. And if you want this level of analysis delivered to you every day as this situation develops, subscribing takes 2 seconds and make sure you never miss the moment when everything shifts.